So over the weekend, I posted assignment 1.x. And the reason it's called 1.x is because it comes after all the other assignments. It's kind of like an epilogue. In written works of knowledge, you have prologues that come at the beginning before people start reading the forewords and the content, right? And you also have epilogues. This is sort of like a, you know, aftermath. It's a view of the aftermath, right? And you had a solution, and we set up the solution so that you could perform a series of tasks in your home network environment with the intent that we would review results, and you'd have an opportunity to rework after some changes, or after some changes. And I am going to be posting credit for all of your Module 1 submissions for assignments and the solution this week. And as you get those back, if you've already started this additional assignment, then the stage is set for you to go ahead and repeat some of the methods, right? So in a sense, you're getting double credit. You can submit a second time for the Module 1 solution, and part of that second round of investigation involves this assignment. Now, in session on Friday, we started work on staging another DNS machine, and there is a temporary DNS machine that's in place now that has this IP address, and so you can enter this value manually into network settings for DNS with some of your devices, or you could set that up in your router to see how that works for a time. And so it says you log the first point by configuring and demonstrating use. That would mean you'd have a screenshot of this setting that's been manually configured in the IP settings, and then you'd have some basic web browsing to a novel web browser. Now, one of the goals of working this process in our Wednesday session, we're going to review the DNS cache on this machine. Now, I'm telling you that up front. So if you have any personal stuff you want to engage between the time you set this up and the time we review the DNS cache in class on Wednesday on the server, you may want to manually change your network settings back to automatic, just for your own sanity and privacy. So this is something that you can do, toggle it on and off as you wish. But I wanted to give all of you advance notice that the intent in Wednesday's class is to look at the DNS cache as an example of network artifacts. So we're going to be talking today about Module 2 content. Module 2 content will be drawn from chapters 1 and 3 in your textbook. So for network basics, we focused on chapter 2. Now we're pivoting, and we're talking about the network landscape. And then part of that is evidence or artifacts, okay? So as you explore a network landscape, you're going to encounter artifacts and exhibits. E for exhibit. Remember, the word exhibit starts with E. That also is the term that we use when an artifact becomes a matter of evidence, right? So artifacts are just, they're just any kind of fact or detail or data point that you encounter anywhere along the anywhere along the lines of your network forensic process, and they become exhibits or evidence when it looks like something is going to involve legal or civil process, okay? So that's something we'll explore in greater depth in a minute. What I'm hoping to avoid is that when we have a chance to look at the DNS cache on that server, we're going to see mild, benign examples of websites. Now, if some of you want to intentionally spice it up, what you can do is change the settings for DNS, and just to make life interesting on Wednesday, you can examine some rather provocative web-based resources. But keep in mind that this is something we're going to be doing live in class, and what we don't want is something that's so obnoxious it would be like an NSFW scenario. Okay, so if you want to make life interesting and you want to go to some crazy sites, that's one thing. I just want you to be aware that for each of you that convert your DNS settings over to this local DNS machine, the cache is going to capture generic information that doesn't point to a single person, but there are chances that depending on what pops up on the screen, it could be like a smoking gun, and everybody looks at that one person in the class and goes, yeah, I know you, and I know that's your website. And that's the kind of thing we want to avoid. So we want to showcase its potential, and we also want you to do this as an assignment. Now, I started to make it optional, and then I thought, yeah, if I make it optional, we have some folks who are a little gun shy, and they may not understand the intent or the purpose of this assignment. That's why we're spending the time to articulate that now as a matter of record. This will be out on YouTube. This recording will be out on the public YouTube channel. Our Wednesday session will be private. So as we investigate the DNS server cache as an example of network artifacts and how useful that is and how cool that is, if you do this, you're satisfying the requirements of the final assignment for Module 1. You're setting the stage for you to resubmit for additional credit for the solution for Module 1, and you're also providing authentic, real-time material for our investigation in Module 2. So this is incredibly important, and I'm going to be very disappointed in each person who fails to do something with their technology from their home environment, okay? You can choose something in your home environment that is relatively benign. All of you have connected devices. All of you have a wide range of smart appliances and so on, I mean, what I'm saying is it doesn't have to be your personal laptop. It could be a smart TV, or it could be, you could configure your network settings for your video cameras to this DNS, which means that the updates for your video cameras would know how to process, but otherwise your video cameras don't do any web browsing, or at least they shouldn't be. And if they were, wouldn't you want to know it? So why am I suggesting that our connected devices have like the qualities and characteristics of a living, breathing human being, right? There's a term for that. When you take animals or objects and you ascribe human behavior to them, I'm not going to tell you what the word is, but I thought I would share with you this morning an interesting, similar kind of along those lines. So I use my laptop every day, several hours a day, and it's open and it's connected. And so in my condominium association, we had some concrete work that had a crack that needed support, and I was talking on my phone to others and sending email about ordering jack posts. suddenly this morning, as I open, and it's this morning, as I open my Bing, well, not my Bing, my Edge browser, what I find is that here's an ad on the front splash page of the Edge browser, and what is it about? Jack posts. Now, I'm a fan of probability, but what do you suppose that a Jack post ad would just spontaneously appear out of nowhere for no reason, out of all of the ads on the planet? What do you think the likelihood is that that would be just an innocent, spontaneous occurrence from what you've just learned?
It's not
It's
spontaneous or random.
it's not random. It's not random at all. It's absolutely intentional, and this is how our online platforms collect revenue. Yeah. The reality is that a lot of stuff we use that's free, it's not really free. Somebody's paying for all this content, and the reason they're paying for it is they get to channel ads. They get to customize ads. And one of the things that we do with our smart TVs is that we use them and we use voice prompts, and we forget that sometimes those things are active in the background. Okay? So why would you care? Let's get back to this full circle. Would you or would you not want to know, with your own DNS server and the cache of activity on the network and the endpoint websites and internet resources, wouldn't you want to know if something was pointing to an odd location? I know I would. I plan to use the hell out of this, and I'm going to be setting up my own pie hole for that same reason. Speaking of which, 3 Raspberry Pis have been claimed so far out of my office for students that would like to set up Pi-hole in their home environment, or use the Raspberry Pi for other purposes. One of the things you can do is, if you're a little squeamish about your own personal technology or home connected devices, is that you can request by email at the end of this class, or do it right now. Don't waste time. Operators are standing by. There's an 800 number. Call now while prices are low. And what's the price? Free. Give this to you, you take it home, you connect it, and then you use it. That can be your test subject all by itself. You don't want to do anything else, okay? You can connect it to a flat screen TV, not a smart TV, just any TV. And as long as you have Wi-Fi in your house, away you go. Any questions so far?
I have a question. So instead of Pi-hole, I was planning to do or use Adgar Home. I
Uh-huh.
could do a headless install and then just SSH into it, and then use its UI to do all the same stuff as Pi-hole. And then there's it's a better UI, and it also has some more advanced features, I think. So I was wondering if it's okay to use that instead of just Pi-hole.
Oh
I'll
yeah,
still be using the Raspberry Pi. It's just a different thing.
absolutely.
Okay.
That would be great material for your seminar course, your independent research. That's a really good idea. Um, just as long as you're doing something that's legal and in the interest of, scholarly work, right? So, great question. Glad you asked it. So, are there any questions about the 1.x assignment? Did everybody see when it's due? Why would it be due Wednesday at 9 a.m.? What were we going to do at 9 a.m.? We're going to crack open that DNS server and see what cached results are in there. And I hope we're pleasantly surprised and amused, but also amazed. That's the hope. The first time I had a DNS server open in front of an audience, it changed how the internet was used for an entire campus and 1,000 users. And that's no exaggeration. But it also protected the privacy of those 1,000 users. So it was a really powerful tool on the network. And it's one that's underestimated. I mean, it's just a wealth of resources. So please make sure you do this by Wednesday, 9 a.m. And if you want to use a Raspberry Pi instead of your other connected devices, just as a proof of concept to browse somewhere unique that nobody else is going to think of, so we can look at it on Wednesday morning, then send me an email and I'll make sure that later today or tomorrow, you can pick up that Raspberry Pi, connect it, and get started, okay? So I haven't posted the content or the cover page for Module 2. I'm working it up now, but I do have notes about the student learning objectives. And what I'd like to do is to highlight the key objectives in brief. So this would be the first: define relevant terms, right? Just a very short student learning objective. Not going to list all the relative terms, but that would be one of our goals for this Module 2 content. We go here to my tablet. I'm going to connect my tablet now. Any questions before we start our review? Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, it's still it says you're sharing.
There we go. Okay. We want you to exercise and reflect good form. It's considered good form to use the right terms and terminology when you're involved in a profession. And this is a screenshot. Basically, I'll have selected screenshots out of the textbook, but I want you to understand this idea of the term forensics in the first place. So it has to do with the concept of public, right? Something that belongs to the public. So forensics is to reveal for public, right? Belongs to the public. It's related to the word forum. And what we're really talking about are investigations or review by authorities, right? Could be private or public. Of course, digital forensics, we did cover in the digital forensics class that network forensics is a branch of, or a subcategory of forensics. And so the portion of this class that you need to be concerned about, you need to understand the context. It says computer or digital forensics is the practice of investigating computers. That's anything with a computing capacity. So computers in this case means anything with a computing capacity. That could be a car right now. In fact, this summer I had to scramble some things to get home to deal with that family loss I referenced on Friday. And at the airport, I rented a car. And in the history of the smart car connections with people's personal technology devices was their profile. And there were a dozen user profiles still stored in the car. Hello, hello. I went to the rental counter and said, did you know that the private information of a dozen previous renters is still loaded in your car? And they went, oh, we're supposed to erase those when we prep the car for the next person. Well, guess what? Sometimes the turnaround time is non-existent. So they just rent the car back out again, right? Digital media, right? Anything that's ones and zeros, and digital communications. That's where the networking piece comes in. So that's a broad definition, but that's the piece that concerns us, the communications, digital communications, which may include artifacts from the computers and content, right? So as digital communications are occurring, there's also digital content in the mix. So it's, yeah, it has to do with ones and zeros in transit. And then this tends to be how the ones and zeros are processed. And then this is ones and zeros stored. That's just a historical review for those of you that remember a few things about digital forensics. Any questions about that? So another term that's important to understand is that when you talk about digital evidence, it's usually presented as a part of a court case. It could be civil or criminal. And that's an important idea. Now, if we're just talking about the item itself and there's no potential for that civil or criminal review, then the term is artifact, right? So in a legal setting, you're identifying digital artifacts within a large collection of data. Now, there's two aspects of network forensics, one that's legal and formal, and then there's another that has to do with incident handling. It's incident response. So one aspect of network forensics has legal context, and that's where these other terms come into play. But there's a second major context or primary context for network forensic activity, and that's in the setting of IT support. So when we're talking about network forensics as a method of enhancing the technology that's used by an organization, in that context, it's incident handling and the whole realm of incident handling that goes with it. Now, incident handling can be very private, it can be internal, and it can be completely removed from a legal context. But there's always a potential, and you're going to see in a minute, for things that are collected on one level to, oh boy, I'm not sure how this happened. All right, hold on. There we go. I think we're here. Yep, incident handling. So, hang on just a moment. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second, if I can get my Zoom going again. Any questions about those distinctions at this point? Everybody with us?
Yes.
Yes.
So those concepts, those timeless concepts that we talk about in cybersecurity, things like integrity, right? One of the most important aspects of evidence concerns the rules of handling that gets into chain of custody, and that's something we'll do a deeper dive on. And then methods that you would use to assert authenticity, right? So one aspect of evidence in the rules of handling has to do with the chain of custody. You have to affirm positive control during collection, during storage. That should read storage. Storage, analysis, interpretation, presentation, and stewardship. Now this one is a boomerang. So this is one aspect that bites people all the time. And essentially what we have is a case where some forensic specialists do an excellent job of collecting data, storing data, analyzing the data, interpreting the data, presenting the data, and then the court case is over. Has anyone ever heard of the word appeals?
Yes.
So why would long-term stewardship be a boomerang? Why would that cause a huge problem for certain forensic professionals? Are you done? Put another way, let me ask the question another way. Are you done maintaining positive control over digital evidence after the court case is settled?
No.
That's correct. As a decision that's rendered can be appealed, and it can be appealed years after the fact. Somebody can be in prison for years, and then they find out, wait a minute, I have proof, let's go back, let's look, I'm appealing, and then what happens? Oh, you didn't think that 5 years later you would need to have chain of custody over that data, right? That's huge. And that's just one thing that we don't really appreciate or anticipate, right? That's just one thing that we don't appreciate or anticipate. Now, there is a pecking order that, and this is information, right? There is pecking order with regard to jurisdictions. So you have different legal systems, and they each have precedent. And what we're going to do is switch back to the textbook. Any questions at this point?
No questions.
So legal context requires an understanding of the legal system, right? And the United States of America uses a common law legal system. What they mean by common law is that there are laws that are passed by a legislature and then interpreted by the courts, right? The United Kingdom does this as well. But there are exceptions, and this one really took me by surprise. How many of us knew that in Louisiana, they have a civil law system? It's not a common law system, it's a civil law system. So there's a distinction there that's relevant. And regardless of that, you have, and we all know this, you have local law or statutes for municipal government, for metropolitan areas. And then you have state or territorial laws, then you have national laws, you have international laws. And in terms of the pecking order, does anyone understand which one overrules which one? Like, put another way, would international law always overrule national law? Yes or no? Hello?
I think no.
It would not always. That is correct. If the national jurisdiction, the national law is more stringent and stricter than the international, the stricter case for that jurisdiction, whenever you have multiple jurisdictions to consider, the stricter standard would be the one that overrules or overrides, right? Unless the higher level law explicitly excludes lower cases. Like if the US Constitution says, nah, you can't seize property without a warrant, right? then that overrides the local. If a state, like let's say Louisiana had a civil law system that allowed for the seizure of property under certain circumstances, it would still be overridden by the national standard for that particular criteria, right? One of the most important things to understand is legal precedent. So when the court rules on a case, you don't have to retry everything all over again. You can basically use the court decisions. So precedent is considered, it's called case law. It's the outcome of court cases that were reviewed by a judge to interpret a thing. And that's also a part of our legal system. And one of the most important ones has to do with polygraph. Does anyone know if polygraph tests are admissible in court? Does everyone know what a polygraph test is?
Yeah, so basically a lie detector test.
A lie detector test. Did you know that hiring and firing decisions can still be based on the outcome of a polygraph test? It just doesn't pass the legal standard for use in court. So yeah, polygraphs are still used, but the test results from polygraphs are not. So the important thing is this test case. So Fry was a test case with the United States of America. Fry was the, let's see, the plaintiff against the United States, or was it the United States against Fry? Should probably look that up. In 1923, right? What they basically determined, what came out of Fry, that's most important, is the idea that you can use scientific evidence in a court of law, provided that a community helped to establish the standards of what it is and how it's interpreted. So scientific or technical evidence that's presented before the court must be generally accepted by a meaningful portion of the community of those responsible for the process, principle, or technique being presented. So Fry established the admissibility of technical evidence. The important thing to understand here is that this court decision all by itself paved the way for digital forensics, and in particular network forensics. So the digital artifacts are valid as exhibits or evidence once they go to court because of this landmark decision in 1926. Fry, 1926, okay? But the catch is a community of experts has to agree or understand generally accepted meaningful portion, right? Look at those terms, generally accepted meaningful portion. That means that there has to be agreement among subject matter experts about what the evidence means, okay? So why is that significant? Well, before long, another standard came along that had to do with the federal rules of evidence, Daubert, right? So there was another landmark court case, and it had to do with the federal rules of evidence that were passed in 1975. So this court case came after. I'm going to try to trick you on the assessment and I might ask, you know, what year was Daubert versus Merrill Dow Pharmaceuticals, right? And the reason that this court case is so important is because after the federal rules of evidence were published in 1975, the Supreme Court ruled that if there's a conflict with common laws, such as the standard set by Fry, that the federal rules of evidence took precedence, meaning it's the federal rules of evidence that are more important than what Fry established. So what's important to understand about Dalbert and that case? Well, essentially, it's saying that when it comes to experts, experts have to explain the evidence as if the evidence the evidence can't speak for itself. So experts are explaining the evidence, they're interpreting the evidence. And the expert witness alone is not sufficient. So what are we saying? An expert, a subject matter expert, is a witness that is a stand-in at trial for the evidence. So that evidence is allowed in court. That's Fry. The federal rules of evidence, right, basically says that there are certain standards that have to be met when the expert witness presents that evidence because of a concept called hearsay. Okay. Does anyone understand what hearsay is in general terms? What's the common definition of hearsay?
It's like it's an opinion. It's not really factual. It can't be proven. It's like somebody saying they saw it. Like, so where's your proof if you saw it? It's
Yeah, there is an interpretation component of it. That is one aspect of it. That's true. In most cases, when hearsay is eliminated for consideration, is hearsay direct observation or firsthand witness?
yes.
Actually, it isn't. Okay, so let's say that a witness on the stand says, Susie shot John. And the attorney says, did you see Susie shoot John? And Susie says, well, no, not really. Okay, so how do you know that Susie shot John? Well, because I heard from Betty that Susie shot John. Well, now Betty isn't in the room. So it's not firsthand. Does that make sense? So that's tossed, that testimony is tossed because it's hearsay. An attorney representing the defense would say, I object, that's hearsay. And the judge would say, yeah, that's true. So the jury is instructed to disregard that comment, right? See, Betty isn't in the room. It's Susie that's in the room. And she didn't see the person herself. She's hearing it from a third party. So whenever you have third party stuff, it's really important to call that out. Now, what does that have to do with the landmark court case? Well, here's where it gets really interesting, and this is where we're gonna, as soon as we explain this next part, where we're gonna stop for the day. Okay? Expert witness alone is not sufficient, right? So it's the evidence that's actually the component of testifying, right? Except that with technical evidence, most people that are considering that evidence are not technical experts. They don't know how to interpret the evidence, right? So the interpretation of technical evidence is potentially hearsay unless there's agreement among experts. So what am I saying? One thing you have to understand about your subject matter expertise when you're presenting digital evidence is that you're standing in as a proxy for the digital evidence. And this is critically important. You are not the witness directly. You are speaking to what the evidence means, and there has to be common agreement. So what would opposing counsel do to blow that up in court? What's the one thing there are two things they can do to completely ruin your day as a subject matter expert who is interpreting the evidence on behalf of the courts, right? So the courts, they call that the trier of the case, right? So the person who is holding trial, who is presiding over the trial, usually a judge, sometimes a jury, right? They basically are the ones that are reviewing this information. What would opposing counsel do if they understand that you're proxy for the evidence and you're explaining the evidence? What could they do to destroy your testimony? There's two things. They could hire another subject matter expert that could interpret the evidence in a completely different manner. And it's credible. Let me say that again. They could hire another subject matter expert who is properly qualified, who could take that digital evidence and interpret it in a completely different manner. That would kind of ruin your credibility as a subject matter expert, wouldn't it? Hello? Can somebody unmute your mic?
You're still here.
Okay.
We're still here.
First thing they can do is hire another subject matter expert who uses the commonly accepted standards, and then all of a sudden, oh, there's another way to interpret this evidence, right? So as a subject matter expert, you have to avoid bias, right? If there is another way, the point is, if there is another way to interpret the evidence, it's important for you to present all cases how digital evidence may be interpreted, okay? Because somebody else is likely to do it. The other thing that opposing counsel can do is they can destroy your credibility. So what they can do is get you on the witness stand and ask you, are you certified as a forensic specialist? What are your certifications? Are they current certifications? What exactly are the technical criteria that are included with that certification? Oh, it doesn't include protocol analysis? So it's a generic forensic certification, but there's no real network piece to that, right? So what they do is they can, or let's say that that there was another court case where you were a subject matter expert and the court case was thrown out because bias was proven on your part, or they could call out a conflict of interest. Let's say that you're a subject matter expert, but the person that's being charged is a member of your family. They'll come after you, or they'll come after your interpretation. When you decide to be a subject matter expert in a court case, you better make sure that your interpretation of the evidence, there's general agreement about how to interpret that evidence, and you got to do your homework and you got to consult with your peers, qualified peers, and then you also have to make sure your own stuff is squeaky clean, because if there's anything that can be used to discredit you, then they can basically toss the digital evidence, right? There's a likelihood that that can be discarded or not allowed. Does everyone understand the burden of what that means in legal terms? So, all right, what we'd like to do on Wednesday, after we work some quick reviews of the DNS cache, we're going to pick up on Wednesday the aspects of your work as a network forensic in the incident handling arena, okay? And for affirming or attesting to the authenticity. We're going to talk about hashes and incident handling and that kind of thing. All right. Are there any, given the information we've presented today, does anyone have any observations or comments or questions before we clear?
No questions.
All right, we'll see you Wednesday. Please complete 1.x.